Wow. I don't think anyone would guess that this cake is gluten-free.
So before we get started making this cake, what is polenta? Well, polenta is essentially just ground cornmeal. So think of dried corn ground into a meal, and then this is cooked slowly with water or broth to create a soft texture similar to mashed potatoes, but with the sweet taste of corn. So corn arrived in Europe from the Americas in the 1500s, and by the 1600s, the Italians were using it as what we know polenta today, mostly for savory dishes. However, in the last couple of hundred years, they have started using it for more sweet applications, like this polenta cake. So it's usually quite regional, and more so in the north of Italy where polenta cakes have been made, traditionally combined with things like almond meal and citrus like lemon to create a little bit denser, buttery and very rich cake. So today we are doing a modern twist. We are taking all the things that make a polenta cake great, using of course our polenta, some almond meal, our own blend of gluten-free flours to create a delicious moist texture to a gluten-free cake, but we're also adding orange and cranberries to give it a very comforting feel and a bit of a festive spirit. So enough talk about this cake, let's start making it. So the first step for our cranberry and orange polenta cake is we need to start soaking our cranberries. Now you could do this overnight in the fridge. However, I'm just going to do it nice and quickly by putting it into the microwave. So I've got my freshly squeezed orange juice here and my dried cranberries. I'm just going to add those two together with a bit of cling wrap on top, and I'm going to pop this into my microwave for about a minute and then check it, and then we just want to make sure that it is nice and warm for those cranberries to hydrate. And if you don't have a microwave, you can also just do this over your stove top, just on a low heat with the lid on, just to get them nice and hydrated into the microwave. So I just pulled my cranberry and orange juice out of the microwave. It's really hot. I'm just going to let that set aside while we start preparing some of our other ingredients to start cooling down. So we're going to be using an egg replacer called panis egg today, and the reason that I love to use panis egg is it is going to give you an incredible texture for your gluten-free cakes. So a lot of the binding abilities in gluten-free cakes traditionally will come from eggs, but because we want to make this completely egg-free, we do need to use a strong egg replacer that is really going to do a lot of the jobs as a traditional egg. So in this recipe, we're using it for a lot of binding and structural properties, but it's also going to really lock in a lot of moisture for our gluten-free cakes, which we really are going to want because no one likes a dry gluten-free cake. So I have here measured out my water and my panis egg. We're just going to pop that into the water. We need to allow the panis egg to hydrate for the functions to completely start activating. So I'm just going to mix this up. Now to this egg replacement, we are replacing about 3 to 4 eggs in this recipe, just so you're aware. We're also going to be adding a little bit of vegetable oil. Now this is just going to add a little bit of extra moisture and also contribute to the texture that we're looking for in this particular cake. Because panis egg is such a great emulsifier, this is going to come together beautifully. So we'll just blend this together again for another minute or two. You'll notice after you start beating that oil into your vegan egg that you will get a little bit more volume. So we are incorporating a little bit more air in there too, which is going to also contribute to the texture of the cake that we're looking for. So just set that aside for a moment. We're going to move on to creaming our butter and sugar component. So first I want to actually infuse my orange zest into the sugar. Now, by doing this, it allows all of those volatile oils to be released and you get a beautiful flavor from the orange zest. So you want to rub that orange zest between your fingers and the sugar to release the oils, and you'll start to smell it. It smells absolutely delicious. Clean hands, of course. Now you want to use some plant-based margarine or butter, and you just want to ensure that it's a high-fat variety and the firm variety. Now I did take this out of the fridge a little while ago, however it's still not quite soft enough, so I'm just going to soften in my microwave in 5-second intervals until it's lovely and soft but not melted. Now our margarine is lovely and soft, we can add that to our sugar and orange zest. And because I'm not using a traditional butter today, I do find a lot of the time the plant-based margarines do lack that depth of flavor that butter has. So I also like to add a little bit of butter aroma, and this is a little bit of a hack. So if you do want to find out where you can get it, you can always send me a message and I will let you know where you are, where you can buy the butter aroma. In addition to our butter aroma, I'm also using some vanilla paste or vanilla extract. Now we're going to start beating this on a medium speed for a few minutes until it's nice and fluffy. Now to move on to our dry ingredients. Because we are creating a professional gluten-free cake today, I don't like to rely on commercial brand blended flours because they do tend to change a lot. And because we're going to be making our own flour blend today, we can really control what we want to get out of this mixture. So with any type of gluten-free flour blend, you always want to have a protein flour source. So in this case, we are using the polenta, which has a good amount of protein. We also need a starch, and in this case, we are using some potato flour, which has got some good starch in there. And you want a flour or another component that's going to really help with the texture. So the potato starch is going to help hold on to a lot of moisture, but we also are utilizing some almond meal today too, which is going to give a lovely texture and moistness and nutty flavor. So let's go through everything as we combine our flours. So because this is a polenta cake, we are going in with our polenta. Now polenta is essentially a corn meal, and I'm using a fine grain polenta today. So we're just going to pop that into our bowl. So I've just popped my potato flour in there, and it's one of my favorite flours to use for gluten-free. It really does help to lock in a lot of moisture. We have our almond meal. Now some of the problems that we run into when we make gluten-free cakes is getting a nice voluminous lift. Now the issue there is because we don't have the gluten structure of wheat-based flour to hold onto the gas. So I do like to use a little bit of psyllium husk powder. Now you can buy it in the powder, but I do find sometimes it's a little bit tricky. So I tend to just buy psyllium husk from the pharmacy and put it through my spice mill. And I'm just adding a very small amount for this cake. It's not relying on it as much for this particular cake, but I do find it helps to hold onto that gas and just improve the texture a bit. So I'm adding a small amount also to our flour blend today. So that essentially is our flour blend for this cake, is those ingredients. But of course we need to add some leavening to this cake. So we are using some baking powder. So I'm going to add that in. And generally for gluten-free cakes, we do tend to want to use a little bit extra baking powder, traditionally about 25% more in a traditional recipe. That's a good tip to know. We have a small amount of salt just to balance out our flavor. And because we are making quite a festive cake today, we are using some cardamom to add some nice warm spices. So I'm just going to whisk everything together. We just want to ensure that there's no lumps. If you're finding that there's quite a few lumps, you can also sift your flour too. So we're just going to add our dry mix to our creamed margarine and our vegan egg and just mix everything together. While our cranberries are still cooling, we can start lining our cake tin. So I'm using a 20 centimeter cake tin with a removable bottom. It just makes it easier. And I'm going to line the bottom with some baking paper. Now a little trick, as you can see on the base of these springform pans, they do have a bit of a lip, so when you connect them in, they fit like so. However, I do find when you make cakes, by putting it in that particular way, you do get kind of like a dip at the bottom of the cake. So I personally like to flip it over so we have that nice flat surface.
It's a little bit trickier to get it into the form, but it does give you a much better finish on your cake. So, and then we're going to pop that over the top. And I find you do have to kind of slide it on the edge of your bench just to kind of push it up a little. And then just to click to lock it in. Then you can pull your baking paper just to make sure it's nice and taut on the bottom. Just trim the excess. Now I've just got here some softened butter or margarine, and I like to just go around both the bottom and the sides with that, just to make sure everything is nicely greased. So our cake will come out super easy. So as you can see, it's nicely greased. With gluten-free cakes, because our goal is always to get a lot of volume, we want to also put inside either some polenta or some almond meal just to coat the edges of that softened margarine. And so what that's going to do is help the cake as it is lifting and growing in the oven to help climb up the walls of our cake tin. So I'm just going to use some polenta. So yeah, you just want to pop a couple of tablespoons in there and then just roll it around, and then also on the sides too. And then you can pop that into the refrigerator for the margarine to set until you're ready to bake your cake. So I'm going to put that in the fridge now. So I just pulled my cranberries out of the freezer, soaking in that orange juice. Now I know that it's not hot anymore. Essentially, you don't want to add them any warmer than like 30 degrees Celsius because you run the risk of melting all that margarine that you whipped up. So this is perfect. I'm just going to add this now. And we're going to mix everything together. Now once that's well combined, something to note with gluten-free cakes, generally the types of flours that we tend to use take a lot longer to hydrate, so to pull in all of that moisture right into the center of each little tiny granule of flour. So because of that, we do tend to need to allow the flour to hydrate longer. So I do highly recommend that you cover this and pop this into the fridge for at least 2 hours. Now this is going to allow all of the flours and starches to fully hydrate, and you're going to get a much better texture to your gluten-free cake. So if you've ever made a gluten-free cake and it's become very gritty, or you can taste the texture of the flours that you're using, they probably weren't hydrated enough. So I'm going to pop some cling wrap onto this now and get it into the fridge for a couple of hours for everything to infuse and hydrate. See you in a bit. So our cranberry and orange polenta cake has been resting in the fridge for 2 hours. We've already got our prepared tin lined. So we're going to put this batter into the tin. I always like to give it just one last little stir before we do that. I'm just evening out our batter in the tin. Make sure that we've got it all the way into the corners. Just give it a little tap. We're going to pop this into our preheated oven. I've got it preheating at 145 degrees Celsius for convection, so with the fan, or you'll want to do 160 degrees Celsius for the conventional, so no fan. All right, so I'm going to get this going in now. Now we're going to go ahead and make our soaking syrup for our cake. Very easy to do. We just need to put everything into a saucepan. First we have some fresh orange juice, along with a little bit of water, some white caster sugar, and I have a small amount of cardamom, which they're whole cardamoms, and I've just crushed them so they have opened up. Add those two. And some orange peel. And I've got the peel of about half an orange here, and I just used my speed peeler to do that. It's like about 4 pieces. So now we're going to get this on the heat, and we want to cook our syrup until 104 degrees Celsius. This syrup is going to infuse and soak into our cake, making it super rich and moist. And it's also going to keep it fresh for a really long time as well. There's nothing worse than a dry cake, and gluten-free cakes can tend to be on the drier side, and soaking this cake in the syrup really makes it very luxurious and elegant. Okay, so we're at 104 degrees Celsius. Now this is optional, but if you would like to spike your syrup with a little bit of Cointreau or Grand Marnier, you can. And we're using it about a tablespoon, so I'm going to add that right at the end. And I'm just going to pop the lid on just so this keeps nice and warm while our cake is still baking. And we can come back to this later to soak our cake. So I've had my cake cooling. It's cooled down now to 70 degrees Celsius, which is the temperature that we want our cake to be before we put the syrup on top. And our syrup is, you want it to be around the same temperature as the cake. So if it's cooled down a bit too much, you can just heat it back up just for a second. So I'm going to strain off the spices and the orange zest, and keep the orange zest. It's all candied now, and it makes a great garnish once you're done. Now, because I don't want syrup to go everywhere, it's a good idea just to wrap the base with a bit of cling wrap. And taking a skewer, or in my case I'm just using the base of my thermometer, we're going to make some holes all over the cake so our syrup can soak nicely through. And we're going to just brush the syrup over so we get a nice even distribution of that syrup. And having the cake and the syrup at the same temperature really allows the maximum effect of that syrup to be drawn into the crumb. If your syrup's starting to pool, just wait a few moments for it to soak back in and then continue on. Now all our syrup's added. I like just to put the orange zest on top. We're going to come back to that later, but just so it's there. I'm going to cover this with some foil. I'm just going to poke a couple of holes in the top because I don't want any condensation to get inside there and go onto the cake, so that can escape, but it's still going to keep everything nice and moist. Okay, so now I'm going to leave this out to completely cool down before we put it into the fridge. I'm going to put this on my cooling rack now. Now this Greek yogurt chantilly is the perfect addition to accompany sweet cakes or syrup cakes or something that is a little bit more on the richer side. It's super easy to prepare, and I'm going to go through all the steps now. I've got here some Greek yogurt. Of course, you could use a dairy-free alternative as well, and I will also link in your course dashboard in this recipe how you can make your very own homemade yogurt and turn that into a thick strained Greek yogurt as well. Completely plant-based and vegan. So to my Greek yogurt, all I'm going to add is I have some glucose syrup here, or invert syrup. And the reason that we're adding that to our yogurt is it's going to help stabilize our cream and create a really nice smooth texture. I've also got a very small amount of salt as well, just to balance out our flavors. So we're going to first mix these ingredients together. I find by mixing the glucose syrup in with yogurt, it just helps to distribute it a lot more easily. So I'm going to set that aside. Now moving on to our whipping cream. To our whipping cream, I'm adding a little bit of vanilla paste or vanilla extract. This is optional, but I think it gives it a more luxurious feel. And I have a little bit of confectioner's sugar that I'm just going to sift in just to make sure that there's no lumps. Now you're going to beat this on a low to medium speed until the soft peak stage. I think I'm happy with that. I don't want to over whip it because when we add the yogurt, because of the lactic acid in there, it's actually going to stabilize the cream and make it even thicker. So let's leave it at this kind of consistency. I'm just going to put my yogurt into a bigger bowl. And we're slowly going to start incorporating our whipped cream. So I'm just adding a couple of tablespoons at a time, and I'm just folding it through. We don't want to lose any of that volume. but we just want to loosen it up a bit before we add it all to our cream. So now that I've added about half a cup or so, I'm going to add it back to our whipped cream and just fold everything together. So you'll notice that it's still quite soft, but as I said, it's going to thicken up in the fridge. Let's go in and do a little taste test. Wow, that's like the most delicious yogurt. It's kind of almost like a yogurt mousse. It's not too sweet, but you get a little tartness from the yogurt in the background, and this is going to be perfect paired with your favorite, as I said, the syrup cake, or something a little bit more on the rich side. So I'm just going to cover with some cling wrap, and we're going to pop this into the fridge for at least an hour before we are going to serve it. So I've had my cake resting in the fridge overnight just for all of those flavors to infuse, and I can see that it's soaked up all the syrup. It looks amazing. And you can run yourself a knife, or I'm just using my offset spatula just around the edge just to make sure you get a good release. So with my candied orange, I'm just going to slice it up really nice and thinly, and we're going to use that as a garnish on the cake. And I've also got my yogurt chantilly here as well to serve. Now this is more of a rustic cake, so we are going to do a very comforting style of plating. And let's go in with some of our cream. And a few more of our orange zest. Okay, let's give it a try. It looks so moist. I'm gonna just try the cake on its own first. Wow. I don't think anyone would guess that this cake is gluten-free. You get a slight tang from the cream, and it goes beautifully with that syrup and the citrus notes. I hope you enjoy it, guys. I'm going to finish the rest of this.